All right, so I'm going to take that 3253 and break it down further, because a lot of times when we start talking about what does it cost to produce something, we really don't understand how all our costs factor in. And the reality is, if you're sublimating something, every time you press something, you have to account for all the little pieces that go into that. And that's not just the ink, okay? Because if you look back up here, you have a lot more cost up here than just your ink cost. Therefore, you have to make sure that you're generating enough margin to help pay for all these items up here. So we want to look a little deeper. Now, follow me on this closer. We're going to talk about workstations first. A workstation, in my mind, is really defined as like a printer heat press combination. Okay, that's like a workstation. But the interesting thing on this is that doesn't mean you're limited to one item at a time as it would initially appear. Now, certainly, if you're doing, say, T-shirts, you probably can only get one T-shirt on that press at a time. So that workstation is capable of one item at a time. But if you're doing things like coasters, a lot of your smaller items, you can actually press maybe 10 items at once or 6 items at once. So, that's almost a little bit misleading when we say one workstation, it puts out one piece. So as we go through a little further, keep that in mind that one workstation actually can put out multiple pieces during one pressing based on the size of those pieces. But for right now, we're going to talk about one workstation on average is putting out one item. So your average print press time, what is that going to work out to? Well, if you look at just pure numbers on it, you see that if you're using a Ricoh printer, for example, that you can do an 8-inch by 10-inch image in under 30 seconds. So easily you're printing out reasonably sized sheets of sublimation paper in about 30 seconds. And then you're taking over the heat press, and it's under there for about a minute on most items. So it's about a minute and a half. And then, you know what, because you got to transfer something from one spot to the next, especially if you're doing shirts, I went ahead and rounded that up to about 2 minutes, saying so our average print press time being about 2 minutes rather than maybe a minute and a half that you might be thinking of initially. And because as long as you're not having to create a whole new piece of artwork for every item that you print, you can kind of get into a mode of actually putting out a lot per hour. And when you start looking at our capabilities, you could probably put out about 50 minutes worth of routine production in any given hour with a sublimation setup. So if you have 50 workable minutes and the average print press time for an item is 2 minutes, then your hourly piece production is 25 units. Okay, keeping in mind that if on each pressing, let's say I was doing coasters, and I could press 6 at one time, that would actually be 25 times 6. So my output would be like 150. So just kind of keep that in mind. So, just being single items, one at a time, that works out to about $1.30. Now, where did I get the $1.30? Well, the math is done because there's a formula in here, and what we're doing is we're taking the hourly cost of operation, and we're dividing it by 25. See, there's hourly cost by 25 pieces. That means each one costs you about $1.30. Now, you might have been sitting there scratching your head. So, well, no, wait a minute. I didn't use but like 60 cents worth of ink. Right, but you didn't take into account everything else that needs to go into that. And that's what's being reflected here. So this gives you sort of an overall picture of the big picture of what's going on here. Now, like I said before, if I was pressing items and I was able to do maybe 6 at a time. So, there's a whole lot of things to consider here when we start looking at what we can do. So if, on the other hand, I could do 125 pieces because I was doing multiple items up there on that one workstation, you can see that runs into being 26 cents each. Okay, so it's dropping tremendously what's going on here. Now, keep in mind that ink, because people start looking at this and say, wait a minute, how do I know how much ink I used on that? The reality isn't how much ink you used on anything. It's on how much ink you're using over time versus the number of units you're printing over time. Because, face it, there are times where you're doing some test printing and you're using ink, and that's not really being calculated into a job. So that's why when we go through this, where we're looking at the grand total of operational costs and dividing it by pieces, we get a much better accuracy of what it costs per piece to do something. Okay? Put that back to that original number. Okay, one other thing here is so far we're assuming you're making all of your money from printing and pressing, but we didn't take into account the markups on the substrates themselves. For example, what I did was I just based all of your income, all of your revenue based on the service, the production service, but not on the true markups of what's going in there. So what if it costs $1.30 to press and print and press something? If you're actually reselling it for $10, you got that much more margin built in. You're going to see all that kind of factor in as we go. So what I'm doing here is starting with that baseline, and then as we go through this, we're going to build on it.